Let's talk a little bit about dictionary definitions, all right? When it comes to definitions, we go to the dictionary. That just becomes our standard source. A lot of times when we're having a discussion, we are arguing, remember, not in a bad way, but just having a discussion about important ideas. It's important that we get clear on certain definitions. What do we mean by the words that we are using? Well, when we're having a philosophical discussion or a critical thinking discussion, sometimes the dictionary doesn't take us as far as we want to go. And the reason is because what you find in the dictionary is not always the definitive definition or answer to what a given word means. So going to the dictionary is good. It's really a starting point on most of the deep philosophical questions and discussions you might have. So let me explain a little bit about what that is. So a lexicographer would be the name of the people who put together dictionaries. Lexicography would be the study of, defining words, preparing dictionaries, studying the etymology of words and things like that. So lexicographers are the ones who will put together dictionaries with all of the definitions of words. Now we have different kinds of dictionaries. I remember getting a dictionary on the commissary, and when you look up a word in a dictionary, it'll have several different entries there, especially when you are talking about philosophical or conceptual words like justice or courage or freedom. You might have several different definitions there, right? Well, I remember looking in a commissary dictionary, and I was looking up, what is nature? What does nature mean? What is the nature of a thing? And it said, nature means the essence of a thing. So that was it. What does nature mean? It means the essence of a thing. So I was like, okay, well, flip over to essence. What does essence mean? And you know what it said? The nature of a thing. So it was just circular. I went to nature. It said, it's the essence of a thing. I go to essence. It says, it's the nature of a thing. It doesn't really explain a whole lot. Well, that's because some dictionaries are short, compact. They don't give you a lot of information. But if you get something like an Oxford English dictionary, which is going to be a huge volume, that dictionary is going to give you a lot more than just one or two entries. One of the things they're going to do is give you a history of the origin of that word. That's called etymology. Etymology is when you are going back to look where the word itself originated. What language did it come from, for example, and what did it mean in that language? For example, the word enthusiasm in English. When we think of the word enthusiasm, we might think of somebody who's excited, passionate, spirited, lively. There's a bunch of other words we can use for the word enthusiasm. So if you look in an Oxford English dictionary on enthusiasm, they're going to say the word comes from Greek words that actually meant possessed by the gods, right? So the ancient Greek word that we get our current word enthusiasm used to mean possessed by the gods. And you might be able to make a mental connection. Okay, people that we consider possessed by the gods are kind of crazy. And so maybe that over time just became lively, excited, and passionate. However, what you ought to recognize is that just because you can find the origin of the word, like it came from Greek and the Greek words that make that word up and what it means, that doesn't always mean, it's not always how we use that word today, right? So sometimes finding the origin of the word is irrelevant to the discussion. It doesn't always matter. It doesn't always give you the kind of information you need. And I can't tell you how many times I see people in prison with all these weird conspiracy theories, and it's because they're trying to find the origins of the words that we use, and then they think there's something secretive or powerful or mystical about the origins of those words. As I'm thinking about this, I'm going to have to do a whole discussion on what they call exegetical fallacies. These are errors in our thinking when we're trying to interpret things. So the fallacy just means an error in thinking. And so an exegetical fallacy is a fallacy in our thinking when it comes to deciphering words and interpreting words. And so there's a bunch of them, right? Here's one just for an example. If you wanted to understand what the word butterfly means, and you went back and maybe you looked at butter and fly, When you think of butter, you think of like the food. When you think of fly, you think of like the insect. When you put butterfly together, you don't get the image of butterfly. So just breaking down the word doesn't always help you in trying to understand how people use it today. So a lexicographer is going to break down the origin of the word, its etymology, and a lexicographer is also going to look at the history of its usage because words change in their meanings over time. One meaning will be more dominant than the other. So, for example, if you think of the word bad, B-A-D, bad, like the normal way that people use the word bad is something negative, something that we don't like or we dislike. But you know, the word bad can also be the total opposite in slang. When we say something's bad, we might mean it's cool, it's good, it is favorable. So the history of the word has literally changed its meaning to its opposite depending on the context. And so we can see words change over time. This is why you have to get new Bible translations or new Quranic translations, because as the language evolves, you need to retranslate the older material so that people can understand it better. Right? So like, I don't know, a lot of people hang on this King James only version of the Bible. One of the huge problems is that the original King James English, we don't use words like that anymore. So you might be reading the King James Bible and you see an English word and we don't use that term like that anymore. And you're going to get the incorrect interpretation. You're not going to understand what it actually means. One easy thing you can do, not just go read like the King James Bible, but if you ever read Shakespeare, go try to read some Shakespeare. I took a class when I was in prison on Shakespeare, and I did not like it at all. I have to admit, I don't understand why he's so awesome. I guess you have to be like a real English scholar, because when I read Shakespeare, I don't understand what the heck he's saying, right? And it's because half of the words he's using, we don't use anymore. So words change, and a lexicographer is going to be studying the history of how that word has been used. The other thing a lexicographer is going to do is look at how the word is being used today in contemporary times. And this is where things get tricky. All right. So they're looking at the etymology of the word, the origin of the English word. Maybe it came from a different language. What two words from the other language combined to make the English word? That's its etymology. And then its history. How was it used in different periods throughout time? And then its usage today in contemporary language. And this is where it gets tricky. So for example, the word racism. I've used this in another discussion. The word racism. After the killing of George Floyd in 2020, we had all those riots and stuff all over the country. A woman, she's like 20 something years old, emailed I want to say it was the Webster's, Merriam-Webster dictionary, and told them they needed to add a new entry to the word racism. Right. So this is in 2020. And she said because she'll get into discussions with people about racism and they will open up the dictionary and say, I'm not a racist. This is not racist. Look at the definition of racist. And she realized the definition of racism that she was using wasn't in the dictionary. In fact, it wasn't in any of the dictionaries. But the definition she was using was a very common way of describing racism. So whereas the sort of traditional dictionary before 2020 might have said that racism is like attributing intellectual or moral value to people based on race. In other words, thinking that people are intellectually or morally superior or inferior based on race or something like that. But now the newer definitions are very sociological, psychological definitions, where racism can mean like unconscious behaviors that you have that uphold or support certain institutions, laws, and policies that were born out of racist ideology. It's a really vague sort of way of describing racism. But the thing is, even if I disagree with that way of understanding racism, as far as the dictionary is concerned, they're not making a judgment as much about whether we should or should not use a word in such and such a way. Because if the majority of the culture or a really important segment of the culture starts to use a word differently, then the lexicographer just has to put it in the dictionary. And so that was her point. So even if you disagree with all the new jargon around racism, the fact is a lot of people are using it. And so a dictionary ought to add that new entry. So I don't personally agree with it, but I'm just saying it doesn't matter what I believe. It's just a fact that a lot of people are using that way of discussing racism. And so the dictionary needed to be updated. So all of that is just to say that sometimes in philosophical arguments, in arguments about important issues, just going to the dictionary may not be very helpful. It can be a good starting point, but then some of the definitions you yourself might want to debate, and that's legit if you have good evidence and argumentation for it. So it might be the case that you look at a definition and you're using it one way, and another person using it a different way. And so you guys just have to clarify how you're using the word. Maybe you want to argue about which one of them is more legit than the other, but the point is, at least you are clarifying what you mean by a certain term and all of its consequences.